The USC Trojans are heading in the right direction. That is as clear as day, as clear as clear skies, with no clouds, just the sun warming you up with the blue sky. That's how clear it is, in my opinion, that USC is heading in the right direction. What they did against Michigan, reclaiming the lead 24-20 after trailing 3-14, and reclaiming the lead, just taking the lead. They didn't have a lead in the game, but really reclaiming the momentum that it felt like they had entering this game. They were undefeated. They had a bye week. They were power rated ahead of Michigan and favored. Michigan, meanwhile, was humiliated by Texas only 2 weeks prior. It felt like they came in with the momentum, and they came out of the tunnel in Michigan very pumped up, raising their arms, lifting up the crowd, encouraging them to be loud. And then Michigan took a 14-0 lead, and it was 14-3 at the half. USC only putting up a field goal in their final drive, or second to last drive before halftime. And then to go up 24-20, to stuff Michigan's rushing attack for the entirety of the second half up until that point, and running themselves for 119 yards in the second half, was very, and I mean very impressive. They're definitely heading in the right direction. And in the preseason, I got to be honest and tell you that I picked USC to go under on their win total of 7.5 and to not do well in the Big Ten. And for full disclosure, I actually picked them to go 5-7, 3-6 in Big Ten Conference play. However, I said, I don't like that prediction. Stay away from it. I feel like USC could just as easily go 9-3, 10-2, 8-4. And regardless of what happens this season, if USC commits to Lincoln Riley, if the team doesn't give up on him, and if he makes further changes to his staff if necessary, and I think you may be looking at that after the season in parts, they could be very good and like a obvious national title contender in 2025. Well, what are we seeing right now? We saw a team that refused to quit, that was able to limit one of the better rushing offenses in the nation for a quarter and a half, maybe for an entire half. But nonetheless, it's impressive. And they were able to make some adjustments on the offensive line to better protect Miller Moss and to get Woody Marks and their other running backs involved in the game. It was a loss for USC, but in all the ways that a team can lose, like factoring in their current culture, the circumstance of both the coach and the program and the roster and the score and the dominance and the game control, this is one of the better ways to lose, because it showed that in the long run, unless this was USC's absolute ceiling, like they were playing their absolute best against Michigan, at which point there may be cause for concern, then there's a bright future ahead. And what I meant by cause for concern is I think Michigan is a great team. They could be near elite, but they're certainly not elite. And if you're USC, you don't want the game against Michigan to be the absolute best the team looks. You don't. You want the offensive line to play better, even though they may not face a D-line close to what Michigan, put out against them. You want the defensive line and the linebackers and the safeties and the corners to play better. You want that defense to not give up nearly 300 yards on the ground again. And USC probably won't face Michigan again this season. I doubt either of these teams, unless USC goes 11-1, goes to Indy. I doubt Michigan, period, goes to Indy unless they showcase something they haven't, a passing offense. But there are improvements to be made for both of these teams, and particularly for USC, because USC has a lot of talent. They have a new defensive coordinator in DeAndelin, who's a genius. Eric Henderson, Doug Belk, Matt Entz are elite position coaches. They have an offensive line that is young with a future potentially NFL center, and their receiver core is very young. Like, USC is a very young team. So there are areas where they can improve perhaps drastically throughout the season. And what I saw from them was toughness dedication. There were areas with both player execution and coaching execution that could have gone differently, that could have been more favorable in the direction of USC. They could have done more to maximize their chances to win, but you live and you learn it. And it was USC's first game ever in Big Ten Conference play. It was a historic matchup for that reason alone. Lost by 3. It's painful, but USC's worst matchup of the entire season, looking ahead at their schedule, was probably this game all along. I mean, who else do they play? They play Penn State at home, I'll tell you. They play Notre Dame at home. They play Nebraska at home, Rutgers at home. And those are tough games. Those are opponents who can all beat the USC Trojans. And then they have a road game at Minnesota sandwiched in between Wisconsin and Penn State, which I think is ugly, especially with it being in October. And at that point, it's going to begin to get a little cool. Minnesota can run the football. They have a road trip to Washington, road trip to Maryland. This schedule's not easy, but there's no Georgia, there's no Alabama, there's no Texas, there's no Ohio State. There is not a road trip to Penn State in November or a road trip to Oregon. The game at Michigan was, when you look at matchups and average that out with home field advantage, was probably the hardest game on their schedule. I think Penn State's a better team than Michigan right now, much higher ceiling, but with USC playing Penn State in the Coliseum, and I don't know if Penn State has the same trench play that Michigan does, USC might be able to better dictate the style of the game against Penn State, and that with home field advantage is a benefit. I mean, I look at Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Josiah Stewart, Derek Moore, and then Greg Crippen, Josh Preeb, Giovanni El-Hadi, Miles Hinton. I don't know if USC will face a collection of trench players like that for the rest of the regular season. I mean, heck, they probably won't. They probably won't face a defensive line anywhere close to that Michigan defensive line. And they may face better O-lines than the Michigan one, but Michigan's one of the best offensive lines they'll play all season long. This team is one that, if they play their cards right, hosting Wisconsin, 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 12:30 p.m. Pacific Time, this Saturday in Week 5 on CBS. They play at Minnesota the following week, October 5th. Host Penn State October 12th. Play at Maryland October 19th. Host Rutgers October 25th. Play at Washington November 2nd. They get a bye, then host Nebraska November 16th. Play at UCLA November 23rd. And then they host Notre Dame November 30th. If they play their cards right, this team can go 10-2, 11-1. I would say the most likely loss on the remainder of this schedule is Penn State at home. Penn State, through power rankings, is drastically better than every team on the schedule outside of maybe Notre Dame. And Notre Dame is much more limited offensively than Penn State is. Plus, with it being in November, in California, you're going to get a more extreme weather difference between California and Indiana in November than you would, let's say, this time September, because Indiana in November very much you could have snow, you could have freezing temperatures, you could have ice storms. In California, it'll be cooler than it would be in California in the summer and early fall, but there will still be warmth. So you'll have that type of temperature change and environment change. And again, more importantly than the weather, because the weather a lot of times is just an excuse, Penn State has shown that they are not nearly as limited as Notre Dame is offensively. They look more balanced defensively, and they also look better coached. I mean, James Franklin doesn't lose to Marshall or Northern Illinois. I'm someone who's been very critical of James Franklin, but something that he does very well is he rarely, if ever, loses to the teams that he shouldn't lose to. And by that, I don't mean some smaller Big Ten teams or medium Big Ten teams, which he occasionally has lost to. I mean, like, doesn't lose to MAC schools, doesn't lose to the Group of Five, as an example. USC, I think, could be one of the best teams in all of college football next year. If they play their cards right, build up momentum, reach the playoff, or at least get close, go over their win total and then some this season. They can return a lot of players, a lot of them. Let me pull up their depth chart for you just to explain this team and how young they are. USC right now, they're starting Kyron Hudson, Jacoby Lane, Makai Lemon, Zachariah Branch, and Deuce Robinson's involved. All of those players outside of Kyron Hudson are true sophomores, and Hudson could return as well. So your entire wide receiver core, the players that are involved, could come back. Elijah Page is a redshirt freshman. Alani Noah is a sophomore. Mason Murphy's a redshirt junior. Emmanuel Pregnant and Jonah Monheim, I don't think they have eligibility after this year, but maybe they do have extra eligibility. Who knows? Those are your left guard and starting center. I'd assume they're gone, but maybe they have extra eligibility. Lake McCree's probably out for the year, and I'd guess he will want to come back next season, was the leading receiver of this team. Miller Moss is also a redshirt junior, and I imagine unless he wins the Heisman this year, he's going to come back. Why not? Quinton Joyner's a true sophomore, and he looks good at running back. And then defensively is a place with a lot more transfers, many older players, but there is some youth there. And I imagine a lot of these players leaving won't do a bunch of damage because a lot of them were developed by, the Grinch, who destroyed this defense to the point where not even DeAnton Lynn, not even Phil Parker, not Jim Knowles, not Jesse Minter, not Dan Lanning, not even Kirby Smart could build this into an elite defense. They couldn't. That's how broken it is. Even if they had access to to every player in football to build their perfect roster, only then could they probably make it a top 10 unit. And even then, with how the portal is and chemistry, I don't know if that would work. That's how broken USC's defense was last year. The fact that they are on the level they are at right now defensively, which they're 65th in S&P Plus defensively, and they're 11th in defensive efficiency, which is efficiency is different than just how good your defense is. I think efficiency on FPI is like how your side of the ball's performed this year so far, not factoring in any priors, which means it's very volatile and could very well be overrated. And doesn't really factor in. It factors in opponents, but especially this early, it's kind of tough to do that with how, different everyone's strength of schedule is. But S&P Plus, which is less reactive, has this defense as a top 75 unit. And they've played Michigan, and they've played LSU, and they are going to play many other opponents who do not have the same firepower that those two schools had, especially on defense for Michigan, in the passing game for LSU, in the rushing attack for Michigan. The offensive line, I will say, and I think in part this ties into strength and conditioning too, those areas have some questions. And I think that you may be looking at Josh Henson being dismissed or resigned, really just polite terms for fired after this year. That's very possible. I think USC could do a world of hurt to the college football world if they went out and hired an elite offensive line coach. As for strength and conditioning, USC's basically in year one trying to overhaul their roster to better compete in the Big Ten. So I'd give Benny Wiley another year at least, because right now this team looks a lot more physical and tough than it has under prior Lincoln Riley teams, both at Oklahoma and prior seasons at USC. The difference is Miller Moss might be the worst Lincoln Riley quarterback outside of Spencer Rattler, and he may even be worse than Rattler when Rattler was playing at his peak. And I don't think that they have the offensive lines that most prior Lincoln Riley offenses had. So in exchange for having a better defense, the previously elite offenses are now down to, I'd say, great, near elite, maybe even just good. But I'm sure that will correct as the average age of USC's offense is like 2 or 3 years into the program, which is pretty young. Thank you to my Patreon members for sponsoring this video and channel. I want to give a shout out to Crash2488 and Brasco Rascal for being Heisman Patreon members at $25 a month. If you sign up as a Heisman For 6 months at $25 a month, you will get signed free College Football with Sam merchandise of your choice delivered to you, plus access to my weekly college football picks, straight up and also against the spread. You get access to the picks, just not the signed merchandise if you're an All-American member at $10 a month. Thanks to Chris Slayton, Connor Little, OH, Ismar, Tyler Nye, and Chilton Cush for being All-American members. And if you just want your name featured at the end of every video with a shout-out, sign up as an all-conference member for $5 a month. Thank you, John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Steele, Austin Christmas, and Shanaisha Cockrell for being all-conference members. The links to my merchandise store and my Patreon page, both ways to support the channel, are in the description and also down below in the pinned comment. And I also encourage you to join my Discord via the link in the description and also in the pinned comment. Have a great day, guys, and I will see you all soon. Bye-bye.